I'm Dr. Pamela Kane. I'm the music director at St. Gregory the Great Church in Bluffton, South Carolina, and I would like to welcome our Lowcountry chapter of the American Guild of Organists members to this presentation and any others who might find this interesting. I'm going to speak to you today about a piece of music called the Longwood Sketches, written by Firmin Swinnen in 1927. And my proposal about this presentation and what I learned in my doctoral dissertation is that the piece has been inspired by Mr. Swinnen's work in silent movies. So let's go over to the screen and I'll just introduce you to the four movements of the work. First is In the Shadow of the Old Trees, the second Rosebuds, Dewdrops, and Sunshine. And you'll note that each of the titles of the movements has a programmatic title and describes different aspects. So the piece provides the vicarious traveler with a portrait or a picture of what the Longwood Gardens, which was Pierre DuPont's home in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. And this music provides the vicarious traveler, if you will, a picture, a musical picture of what the gardens would have looked like. I really like the quote, which comes from the Longwood Gardens website: exquisite flowers, majestic trees, dazzling fountains, and extravagant conservatory. And what I propose is that this piece of music, written just at the end of the silent movie era, was a replica of what was known as a scenic film. Back in Swinnen's day, Swinnen played for many, many years in silent movies, and he got ideas for this work from his improvisations that he played during these scenic films. So the purpose of this talk is to show that Longwood Sketches is a replica of a scenic film score. A little background on Firmin Swinnen. He was born in Scherpenheuvel, Belgium in 1885. He studied at the Antwerp Conservatory and the Lemmens Institute of Sacred Music. He was influenced by two very important organ composers, Charles-Marie Widor and Alexander Guilmant. In 1914, October of 1914, the Germans bombarded Antwerp. At that time, Swinnen and his wife Augusta were able to escape underground to a seashore where they were able to load onto an oyster boat and escape to the neutral Netherlands. When they got to the Netherlands, it's not certain why they did this, but they did go to England. And without knowing a word of English and not knowing any of these organ instruments that he was about to play, Swinnen played 265 organ recitals for the Belgian War Relief over the course of about a year. Now, again, not certain, there's a lot of uncertainty about why he did certain things, but he was invited back to Belgium to return, and for whatever reason, he decided to go to New York. So he sailed to New York, and the story goes that he was summoned to Samuel Rothafel, the film exhibitor's studio in New York City, and he was asked to play what he saw up on the screen. And he proceeded to do so, and Roxy, Samuel Rothafel, also known as Roxy, hired him on the spot. So he must have been extremely good at improvisation. So Swinnen then played at the Rivoli and Rialto theaters from 1916 to 1921. It is assumed that he went to Philadelphia because of a greater cash reward. He was summoned to Philadelphia to be the organist at the Aldine Theater. And he didn't play too much there. The theater actually didn't last very long. But the good news is that while he was there, Titus Giese, who was Pierre DuPont's private secretary, heard Swinnen play and invited him to Longwood Gardens to play an afternoon recital which DuPont was giving every Sunday to the public, recitals with people of prominence. And so Swinnen played a recital, and the rest is history. DuPont hired him as his private organist for 33 years. The picture that you see on the screen is a picture of Swinnen sitting next to the second organ that was at the DuPont estate. Now, to build my case to prove that the music of Longwood sketches, was inspired by scenic films, I'm going to use a few tools. The first will be Kermesse Flamande, a storm improvisation, which I've discovered in the Swinnen library. And it's a recording of Mr. Swinnen playing a storm improvisation. We'll talk about it in a moment. I'll also use the period manuals. Organists were given, during the silent movie era, manuals that gave them direction about what they should play for certain topics. Another was anthologies. In addition to these manuals, the organist would be given an anthology which contained multiple selections, thousands of selections, and each categorized by, if you're playing in a Western, you play this music, or if you're playing a storm, you play this, or you're playing children's music. So each had a category and suggestions for music. The trade papers. If you look at the trade papers, it explained what type of music was being played. There would often be reviews of not only the feature films, but the scenic films, and would describe some of the music that the organist would be playing. A visit to the Swinnen Library in Kennett Square revealed a lot to me. And program notes. Swinnen wrote a lot of program notes about the music that he played, which gives a great deal of detail and information that will help support the case. And also newspaper reviews and audience reception. I think one of the most important things to note is that when someone in the 1920s would listen to Swinnen's music, they would be able to automatically identify, and I have some newspaper clippings to prove this, they would be able to identify what was happening in the music without even having to see what was up on the screen. So it's a really important other piece to build this case. All right, so let's talk about the first tool I was using, which is the Kermesse Flamande. Let's talk about the Kermesse, which is Ker meaning church and Messe meaning mass. Originally, these Kermesses, they were festivals, and they were mostly about sacred things. For example, the patron saint of a village in Belgium, for example, would have a patron saint, and they would have a festival that day. And the festival would be revolving around what was happening in the church. And over time, the Kermesse would become more of a sacred event, secular, or mixed with what was going on secularly. And 1896 is an important year because apparently in 1896, moving pictures first were shown at the Belgian Kermesse. So it's very likely, Swinnen being born in 1885, that he was witness to early films. And so he already had seen, wow, what's happening with films. And so then what has happened now, he has this piece, Kermesse Flamande. In the Swinnen Library, there is a reference to this piece, but I was not able to find it. And there are program notes that he wrote. If you look here, the synopsis that he wrote at the bottom of his of a program that he did for Longwood Gardens, it says, cathedral bells and Tevian trumpets announcing the day of joy, religious pageant, people singing Gregorian music, and old Flemish folk songs. The day ends with the famous wooden shoe dances. So it's going to be interesting in a moment when you do get to listen to this music. You are going to hear aspects of all of these things in the Longwood sketches. And again, this piece is non-extant. However, the storm improvisation is extant. And I found a recording of Swinnen playing this. I strongly recommend that you go to the link, which I will provide for you. And I will also give you program notes that I've written myself and an analysis of this piece so that you can listen to this piece, him playing it live, him playing it in 1926 at Longwood Gardens, and then you can follow along with the analysis that I did. And all of these things are basically a fleshing out. So I won't read this all to you, but you will be able to check it out for yourself. and you will hear all of these things. For example, bird calls. You'll hear some hymn tunes. You'll hear chimes playing. You'll hear peasants running, okay? So these are all things that Swinnen presents in his storm improvisation. Again, all of the themes of sacred, pastoral, avian, and atmospheric, those themes are heard in this piece and are also heard in the Longwood sketches. We won't listen to this piece now, but just a couple of photos of Mr. Swinnen. Again, this is the second Aeolian that he actually helped build. And then next to him is Mr. DuPont in that middle picture. And probably the oldest remaining photo of Mr. Swinnen, Professor Swinnen. Somehow he inherited the title professor over time. I believe that Samuel Rothafel gave him that title to give him a little prominence. All right, now let's move to the next tool or the next supporting piece of information. Now, theater managers, here's the thing. You have sacred music, and the organ was often and almost exclusively reserved for sacred music. And so when the theater organ started to come around, theater managers shunned. They never wanted to hear music that would be heard in church. Because when people went to the theater, they wanted to be entertained. They didn't want to be thinking about a convent. As it says here, the average man thinking of a convent was the worst possible thing for a theater manager. However, one of the people, M.M. Hansford, wrote a lot about music in the theater, in the trade papers. He says some pictures admit real church style in their programs, and any other accompaniment would be detrimental to the effect. He recommends things like chant-like melodies, hymn-like chords, and chime effects. And these are films that he would recommended that this music be used in. And there are other examples. This movie called The Eternal Temptress, 1917, at title, Rome, play a part of Frimmel's church procession with strong tone. So I want to point out that in those anthologies I mentioned earlier, again, the organist would be presented with a topic, sacred music. If there was a need for sacred music in a silent movie, they would have many options. So you will all be familiar with one of the options that is presented in motion picture moods. All right, and number two, this little one here has hymn here. That's also recommended in the trade papers. This is the part that says hymn. And then this last one, number three, Andante Religioso. We have at the very end there, it has a part for chimes. Now obviously on this piano, you can't hear the chimes, but the organ would have the chime effect on it. All right, yes, and in the corner it says, Hansford suggested a distant chime will give a fine effect, but it must be soft. So let's go to the Longwood sketches. Now this is where you're going to see that Swinnen used these sacred four-part chord progressions. Here's Rosebuds. Etc. And In the Shadow of the Old Trees also use what we call homophonic progressions. And if you notice, Swinnen writes for chimes in that piece too. All right, so sacred themes. Yes, there are sacred themes that Swinnen was used in the Longwood sketches. And there are others. Those are just a couple of examples. Now, avian themes. Now, Swinnen did use in his storm improvisation bird calls. Again, please check that out. So Lang and West, those are two people that put together these manuals. And they recommend, these are different ways to represent birds in organ playing. So the first one, just the cuckoo sound. And Swinnen has a cuckoo in the storm improvisation. And the second one, I believe the second one is, oh, hens cackling. Hens cackling. And then the third is a rooster. I'll try that again. Okay, and finally, another man, C. Roy Carter, recommended rooster crowing at D. Here we go. All right, so let's go to the a couple of more examples of birds. These are in the anthologies. Okay, remember again, the anthology was a collection, and each one had a topic. Organists would go to that topic if they were trying to represent different sounds and different themes. All right, so that's Anna Raupe recommends for birds. Now let's go to Swinnen. Let's go to avian themes in Longwood sketches. If you look at the top one, this figure represents birds in Longwood sketches. Okay, so and then the second example at the Allegro Scherzando. I haven't played this in a while, so let me grab it back. Anyway, you can see it. Those musicians there probably could be like, oh yes, I get it, I get it. All right, let's go to the pastoral themes, Now, in the Kermis Flamand, Swinnen references the famous wooden shoe dance, So, and at the Kermis, it's kind of interesting because in Swinnen's day, the Kermissen would have the wooden shoe dance accompanied by hand-cranked street organs, which have a really interesting sound. And in a moment, I'll discuss how Swinnen treats the pastoral theme in his work and how he gets the organ stops to come out sounding like a hand-cranked street organ. Most commonly used music for wooden shoe dances were the matelot. And many of you will recognize Morin Murray's matelot. And listen to this, check this out. Okay, so that would have been likely a wooden shoe dance would have been danced to a song in 6/8 like that with that type of a feel. So I want to point out that in the trade papers, there was, they talk about how all of these cities, that was a French piece. Let me go back for 2 seconds. That was from France. But in those days, the music would travel really easily between different countries. So Belgian people would, and there is a good portion of Belgium that has French ties as well. So the fact that I use this as an example for something that might be more Belgian is not really an issue because all of this music was categorized as one. So Italian, French, German, and English music is almost always categorized as one type of pastoral or folk song. So I just wanted to show you some of the examples in the anthologies of that pastoral music. Again, this would have been used in German topics, in French, in English. So here's an example. And then another example. You might recognize some of these folk melodies. To an example of Swinnen using that pastoral or that folk song in his work. In the Dewdrops movement, the Belgian wooden shoe dance. And here's what I wanted to point out. Those of you who are organists will know that this is the strangest combination of stops, right? Mixtures and flute for solo. And I interpret that as being the hand cranked street organ, which had a strange sound to it. So unfortunately I can't do it on this piano, but at least you'll get to hear that melody. But check out a performance of Dewdrops. I'll put the link up for you. Let me do that one more time for you. There you go. Okay, let's talk about meteorological phenomena. Okay, storms were often a topic of improvisation back in Swinnen's time when he was in Belgium studying. And orage, thunderstorm, there was even a stop on the organ in Belgium and in France that was called orage, and it would create the sound of a thunderstorm. So I thought that was extremely interesting. Now, one of the most successful storm improvisateurs accomplished in the art of reproducing meteorological phenomena was Belgian-born, French-trained Jacques Lemmon. And Lemmon was the one, Lemmon's Conservatory is where Swinnen went to study. And so it's undoubtedly an influence on Swinnen was Jacques Lemmon. And it's interesting, at the bottom here I wrote, Swinnen said his studies at Lemmon's Institute were dull and insignificant. But it's impossible to overlook the influence that Charles-Marie Widor, who also studied there, had on him, as well as Jacques Lemmon. So, let's talk a little bit about some of the, I don't really need to read all of this to you, but just so you know, there was a lot of information in these period manuals about how you could create the sound of atmospheric things, rain and storms and things like that. So I will put up this presentation for you as well if you'd like to look further into that and read all of those quotes. But there's some extremely interesting ways that this can be simulated on the organ. I would just like to read the first one with you and then the rest. The rain effect is produced by holding down as many keys in the bass register as can be covered by the flat of the hand, held lengthwise. The thunder effect is easily produced by depressing several of the lowest pedal keys. The swell pedals should be closed, but slight crescendos should be made at intervals by quick opening and closing touches. Now, check this out. Swinnen in his storm improvisation employs, this is what he does, and you'll hear it, if you listen, you'll be like, I get it. He employs palm clusters, sustained pedal clusters, leaning on the keyboard with his whole arm, opening and closing the crescendo pedal, trumpet fanfares, glissandi stinger chords, and cluster tremolos. I mean, wait till you hear this piece. You're going to be like, I get it, it's a storm. So just a couple of examples in the anthology, lots of tremolos, chromatic scales all over the place. I don't think I'm going to try to play this for you, but you probably get the point, all right? And the other example again, tremolos all over the place, and chromatic whirling figures. If you look at the cursor right here, all these, what we would call whirling figures, tremolos, all right? And now here's where Swinnen uses a lot of atmospheric things are happening in Longwood sketches. I will not attempt to play this right now for you, okay? And I would like you to note, however, chromatics, okay, lots of chromatics. And if you check it out, again, check out measure 90 to 95 in the music. You'll definitely be able to hear those atmospheric happenings. And here's another example. What I think is really, and this is a tough thing to play as well. Look at the pedal, chromatically ascending, right? And then I'll show you one more part where your pedal's ascending chromatically and your manuals are descending chromatically. It's really crazy. So you get the point, right? Oh, another thing that about storms often have augmented triads. So those, I won't do too much explaining about that right now, but that's another really important aspect of the sound of a storm. Here's another one. Check this out. Here we go. Here we go. You got your chromatics going up. You've got the tremolo going in your hands, and then, how about this pedal? There you go again. All right, so you get the point. So let's talk about some other topics that Swinnen covers in the Longwood sketches. Because the other topics I just covered with you, again, were in his storm improvisation. These three I'm going to talk about now were not as much in his storm, although water themes, but more fountains. So we have floral and fauna themes. These are beautiful photos of Longwood Gardens. Water themes and Native American themes. All right, let's talk first about Native American themes in cinema. Okay, so in the period manuals, music used to accompany scenes with Native American subjects possessed overt nationalistic characters. Now, there was a lot of stereotyping indeed. It was a very, but there was a great deal of respect and mystery surrounding the Native American people. And in Longwood Gardens, we'll get to that in a moment, there was a Native American provenance. So here's the thing, pulsating bass open fists. Automatically, the 1920s audience, when they heard that, would know that that was probably a sign that there was going to be some Native Americans in the picture, okay? Exotic scales. Pentatonic uses the 5 notes of the piano, if you will, all the black keys. Chromatic, we already talked about chromatic, which can be used in Native American or in storms, by the way. And they like minor tonalities too. Augmented and diminished intervals, okay? We'll talk a little more about that in a moment. Grace notes like this. Little quick note. You'll see them all over Swinnen's score. Basso ostinato. A repeating pattern in the bass usually. Martial trumpet fanfare. Okay, lots of those. Okay, quick 16th note gestures. And rhythmic rigidity. Okay, you sort of get that. It's very... All right, so that's what you would find in the period manuals. They would tell you that these are things. Now here we go in the anthology. All right, pulsating bass. I'm sorry, it's allegro, agitato, fast, with agitation. Right? Okay? So, as you look through this, you'll see the bass, you'll see lots of 16th notes, lots of chromatics. Let's see if there's any grace notes in that. Not right there. The second example, maestoso, majestically. I'll play a little bit of this one. You get the point. All right, a few more examples. Right here, we have a basso ostinato. This, that, they're all the same exact thing. Okay, check it out. Probably faster than that. Basso ostinato. Here, we have a few grace notes, these little ones, right? All right, 16th notes all over the place. Let's just take a quick look at oh, Furioso, at the top right, Furioso, and it's got a fanfare with it. That this, double dot, is an indication it's a fanfare, okay? It's a fanfare, martial fanfare. Again, these are all in the Native American sections of the anthologies. Let's check this fanfare out. This is a different sound than what I showed you a little earlier, but this is very common to have a nice tender Native American. Okay, so it does still have the components, but it's a little more subtle, if you will. More, I'm not going to play all of these, but just take a look. Chromatic scale everywhere. Now, let's go to the Longwood sketches, okay? Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this motif right here. Very important. This measure and that measure, critical to the whole work. But I want to mention augmented triads, okay? Augmented triads in this first one. Listen to this. This is the opening of the whole work. Next measure. Augmented triads or diminished, I'm not sure which. Okay. Now look at the second example. Bottom starts, bass, pedal. This is pedal for those of you who don't know how to quite read organ music. Pedal is playing a C and a G, open fifth with the pedal. I'll do it with my hands right now. Okay, and the left hand where it says swell, right here is a basso ostinato. Check it out. All right, let me play this excerpt for you. It's really important. One more thing I want to point out. Another way that Swinnen would accomplish this very unique sound is with registration choices. What does he have there? He has oboe or French horn. Very, very exotic sounds. And then the swell has strings and flute, okay? So let me get this going for you. Check this out. Grace notes and all those really interesting rhythms in there. More Swinnen examples you see here. Let me just play that first one, the Andante. Chromatic scale. Chromatic scale. Where did it go? Up here. The dotted note followed by the dotted eighth followed by 16th, or even double dotted Marshall fanfare sound. Okay. Oh, here's a Marshall fanfare right here. Just that. Watch. It has a grace note right before it. All right. And check out this example. Check out this example. I wasn't sure at first if this was an atmospheric example because it has the chromatics. And this is where I mentioned earlier, one hand, you're ascending with the right, the hands, and you're descending with the pedal, okay? I am pretty convinced that this is not atmospheric, that this is Native American because it has the basso ostinato here, the Marshall fanfare there, and then you get your chromatics. I'm not gonna play it for you because I don't think I could do it justice today. Okay, so we've covered the Native American topic. Okay, and I hope that I've proven to you that Swinnen certainly used Native American ideas from cinema in his Longwood sketches. Let's go to the water themes. I like this quote by Jennifer Lynn Peterson. I actually talked to her, I don't know if it was in an email or on the phone, but she gave me a lot of insight into scenic films. One thing she said, travelogue films often highlight water, whether it be oceans, rivers, or waterfalls, because water glistens and moves in such a way that cinema is well suited to capture, okay? So a suggestion in the papers was water characterized by legato purling 16th or 32nd note arpeggios or flourishes. Check out that beautiful fountain. And you can't, there are fountains everywhere. Okay, so these are examples in the anthologies of what water would sound like, okay? You see here, water scene, right? And again, these appeared in the section of the anthology that said, play this when you have water, okay? So you see the 16th notes. I'll just play one of them. I don't think I need to do all of them, but check out the first one, the water scene bar crawl. I'm sorry, I apologize. There we go. recognize these pieces. Oftentimes classical music, Grieg was very popular. Bartok was very popular. A lot of the music that you recognize from operas and things were used in these anthologies as well. And some of them were original compositions specifically designed for cinema. But yeah, there are some examples of water theme. Now, in Swinnen's Dewdrops, all about water, all about water. The opening scene, if you will, of his Dewdrops movement. Check this out. Staccatos. I'll just play a little bit of that for you. I don't have that. I'll play it. And there's a basso ostinato too, but I'm not gonna do it. Tell you what, let's just try to play a little bit of the one at the top right. I can't keep my pedal going, but at least you can hear the manuals and that theme of water. Oh, and how pretty are these? What a great registration choice, right? He's got the melody played by a clarinet, very pretty on that instrument, by the way, and the soft strings in the right hand. Okay, so just let me play a little more of Dewdrops, that part. I'm sorry. I don't think I'm going to do that because I can't do it justice. But again, check out Dewdrops. I promise to give you the link so that you can watch that and listen and pull that up. Oh, more water. Yeah, this is really cool. This particular section, I can't remember which movement it's in, but I analyzed the chord progression here, and it turns out my theory professor, Dr. Ritchie, told me that this progression was the exact one that was used in France for a progression called a font. Font, F-O-N-T, which means fountain. So this is definitely based on the way it looks, and the French connection with the font is one of the representative of a fountain. Check out that nice arpeggio thing going on the right side. More water features. Let's go to the floral and faunal themes in cinema. Okay, obviously Longwood Gardens is beautiful, absolutely stunning gardens. Here's something that's a little hard for, what would have been hard, I think, for an organist. Unlike the feature film or the comedy film, when you would go to the cinema back in the 20s, you would see several films, several genres of film, okay? You get a newsreel, you would obviously get a scenic, you would get the feature film, and in Roxy's case, in Roxy's theaters, you would get a whole program of live entertainment as well, all related, sort of tied into this feature film and leading up to the feature film at the end. So the hard part about playing flowers and trees is they don't move. So how is Swinnen supposed to represent flowers in a scenic picture if it was about flowers or trees? Well, you had two options. What he could do is all right, here we go. A means of animating non-moving objects like flowers, plants, and trees in the scenic tropical nights, I apologize. Tropical nights, for example, and this was a real film. He had two options. He could bring the pictures to life by playing action surrounding the objects. For example, butterflies and birds, right? Or he could play a single theme throughout the segment, either one composed extemporaneously or one recommended for generic nature scenes. Okay, so let's see what he does. Here's an example that I found in the anthology of floral and faunal themes, a single theme. Let's check out this little melody here. And you might even recognize it. Maybe it's from a famous classical work. I won't play the other one for you, but often they were waltzes. As you can see, both those examples scales are in 3/4 in a waltz meter of a waltz. Okay, now let's go to an example in Swinnen when he uses a single theme to represent flowers. And I believe this is in rosebuds. I just realized this particular excerpt is from rosebuds. Beautiful gardens there. Check this out. This is a single theme to represent flowers or trees. I apologize. Let me start again. So that's exactly what that would be, an example of a single theme in Swinnen. Now let's talk about what was in the anthologies when you were representing the action around the flowers. Okay, so for example, Edvard Grieg's Papillon, right? This piece was recommended when you were doing something with flowers, as well as in the butterfly section. Okay, so I won't play that for you. Probably some of you are really good pianists out there. Let me just give you a little idea. Anyway, no, I don't think I will do that. And if I can edit this out, I will. Let's go now to the Longwood Gardens, when he depicted the action surrounding the gardens with a theme similar to Grieg's butterflies, okay? It really looks so much like that Grieg piece, okay? And this again is in rosebuds. I'm not gonna play it because I don't wanna, again, as I say, do it a disservice, but I'll try it. There's that melody again that he had, and now here comes some butterflies. All right, so my husband just went, "Why aren't you playing it?" At any rate, okay, so we've covered all of the different themes that are heard in Swinnen that he would have been representing in the cinema as well. Now let's just talk about a couple of other things before we tie it all together. Cinematic rhetorical techniques found in Longwood sketches. Okay, these things are motif, flashbacks, switchbacks, rhetorical key associations, and rhetorical pauses. Let's talk about first motifs. Now, as you all know, Richard Wagner was the motivator behind the idea of a leitmotif. Swinnen was very fond of Wagner, based on some of the readings that I have done. Of course he was, because in cinema, it's basically telling a story with music, and you use motifs so that the audience can be like, oh, like I said before, oh, they automatically they have a cue. Oh, that's gonna happen now. That's gonna happen now. So motif, really critical to cinema. I won't read all of this, but I suggest you do because it's extremely enlightening. What was found in Lang and West, now remember Lang and West are the ones that wrote those books that told the organist what to do, how to be successful in cinema. So the motifs that we find in Swinnen, the most common ones, are the double tritone Indian war cry, I'll play it in a moment, the martial trumpet fanfare, basso ostinato figure, and the side figure. These are all throughout the entire work, okay? So I want to point out, this is a critical quote by Swinnen, really important. And this is a program note, I believe, at the bottom. No, this program note appears at the beginning of the entire work. Think about this. He says, in the composition, the old and present time are interwoven. The old time by Indian calls and melodies, the present time by modern harmonies. How cool is that? Now here's more. Look what he says here. And I'm not sure if this was actually in the work or if I found this associated with the work in another place. Longwood is an estate centuries old. This part opens with an Indian war cry of 2 measures, which runs through the 3 following movements. Indian melodies are interwoven with modern harmonies depicting the march of time. Check it out. This is the double tritone I was mentioning earlier. Extremely critical, all the way through the piece. Here it is. Listen, check it out. And then he interjects a little bit. Okay, check this out. He changes, he goes up a whole step. Okay, now look over here. You're going along, check out that tremolo there, right there. Right here, I want to play what's happening right there for you. And here, there's that tritone. There's that tritone. After all of this chaos sounds like it's ensuing, all of a sudden you have a tremolo where it says lento. Check it out. Oh, sorry, let me try that again. Okay, then he has some birds. Okay, then he has lento again. And tremolo with a... Okay, and then after all of this, this is the hardest thing to play. I'm not playing, I'm just telling you right now. That takes months to practice, just that. But look, after all of that chromatic stuff, okay, there's your tritone. Just comes out of nowhere, lento. And then again, and it gets a little softer. All right, now the martial fanfare. We talked about that as related to the Native Americans. They are spread throughout the work. Okay, here's one right here. And then the next one in the middle. Okay, and then the next example has it. And then it does it a little higher. Okay, so those are examples of martial fanfare. Now here, I mentioned earlier the basso ostinato, okay? So in this example, remember I talked about the open fifth of the Native Americans, and then above it, now left hand is playing that basso ostinato, just that little bit there, check it out, right? And then he goes into this, and it goes on, okay, along. Now, what he's done is he's taken the basso ostinato into another movement. Here it is again. All right, and so this part, let me, oh yeah, I can do this part. And then all of a sudden, oh, and by the way, here's your tritone again. Okay, awesome. So here we have, it is clearly Native American here. Okay, because he's got some really interesting chromatics. He's got the basso ostinato. He's got the tritone, all right? And then here it continues, more basso ostinato. So it's clear that that's what that's all about. Now, let's talk about the psi figure. Dido and Anais, some of you might remember that really famous psi figure from Wagner. This one, I played it earlier for you. And the psi figure often has an ascending and then a descending. So bum, 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 bum. That little half step right there would be called the psi figure. And then as he goes on in that piece, let's see. Yeah, look at the second example, the one at the bottom left. Oh, I'm sorry. The psi figure's in the pedal. Bum, bum. Here it is. Okay, and then it happens in this pedal here, right there. So that half step figure would be considered the psi figure. I think that the first one is probably the best one though. That's in dewdrops. And I find that that movement is probably the most sorrowful one. Except that he interjects the Belgian wooden shoe dance in that one, which is kind of neat. I think he might be reminiscing about Belgium there. Let's go to the, okay, now this is interesting. One thing that Swinnen would be doing as a movie organist, now there was a lot to this job back in New York, tons to this job. So he would play as the organist about 5, 6, 7 shows a day, all right? And the movie would come in on a Saturday, the movies would come in on a Saturday, and they'd have 1 week of the same films, and then they'd be changing them out. So think about the amount of music that had to be learned and prepared in that amount of time. Not much preparation time. Often he would be playing with the orchestra. Roxy had an amazing orchestra. But then some of the shows would be his show. He would be all by himself as the organist, and he'd have to either improvise music for films based on what he's just seeing up on the screen, which he was really good at, or taking the score that perhaps the orchestra put together. They would spend a whole day and a half preparing the scores. Roxy would sit with his music directors and he would prepare music scores. Swinnen may have been able to take the transcription of that and play it on the organ, but there are various things he did, but I think improv was probably was probably what he did the most. So one of the jobs he had when he was playing with an orchestra is, and this is funny because he would be playing along with the orchestra as a member of the orchestra, and then it would be union break time, and all the orchestra would get up and leave, okay? So he would have to cover for the orchestra so they could go out and have their break. So he'd continue playing orchestrally as they were playing. Another thing he would do with the orchestra is a very interesting technique. The orchestra would be playing a scene, and he knew that as they faded out, he would fade in. They wouldn't go anywhere, but he would fade in. But it would be showing, perhaps, a flashback of the actor. So the organ would create a flashback so that the audience would know that this was not the same time period. This happened earlier, okay? Or a switchback would be switching from one scene to another. Okay, so this just briefly, let me just show you. To suit the action of the flashbacks or short scenes, it is well to improvise on the organ or piano, the orchestra taking up the number again at the return to the scene. The organist accompanying the picture may fit the flashback sottovoce, soft voice, okay? Or use the vox humana, which is a really neat stop on the organ. Vox humana, voice of humans, and it's got you organists know what I'm talking about. How cool is that? And he would play in the playing of the number, which accompanied the full scene brought to our attention by the flashback. So anyway, it was a technique used in cinema extremely effectively. So I'm just going to mention, think about this. Since we cannot see, think about Longwood sketches. The audience is sitting there. Again, they can't see what Swinnen sees, but he has to make it clear to them what is happening with his music. So one of the techniques he used to represent a switchback or a change of scene, radical changes in tempo. It would be suddenly fast or suddenly slow or a dead silence. We'll talk about that in a minute. So he would change the tempo. The registration, for those of you who aren't organists, means the stops that you choose. So he would change the stops quickly to let you know you're in a different place right now. Or the dynamics. You might be in a quiet garden, and all of a sudden, you're in the middle of a Native American scene, okay? So these three techniques, tempo, registration, and dynamics. If you get a chance to read this by Lang and West, it will give you more information about that. Now, check this out. I found this first scene or movement of the piece extremely enlightening about this. Double bar lines delineate scenes. Double bar lines delineate scenes. So for those of you who don't read music, here it is. 2 lines going vertically, not just one. 2 lines going vertically, not just one. This is very indicative of something, right? Why are those there? Well, there are 6 double bar line insertions within the first 18 measures, all right? And my theory, and also based on the fact that you're going from a Native American to birds, back to Native American to birds to Native, back and forth between these scenes, is that these double bar lines represent a change of scene, okay? So let's look at something else. Okay, I want to mention something which I think is fascinating. Rhetorical key associations. Don't read it now, but read it later. It's really interesting. Lang and West go through this whole litany of what keys you're supposed to use for what type of music you're playing. Okay, what key you should use. And this goes back to the Baroque era, okay? This is something that was used, Bach used it and Handel used it. They would choose a key to represent joy or a key to represent sorrow. And as I studied this piece, I realized Swinnen was doing that. Again, read this if you can. It is fascinating. C major, they say you should use C major, check this out. After long wanderings through the rich realms of sharp and flat tonalities, it's a very neutralizing key, right? No sharps or flats. So C major, Swinnen uses to represent the sunshine indicated in the title of the last movement. He's going through a storm and then he goes to the sunshine. E major following 2 occasions of tumultuous music to suggest that there will be clear skies. He uses G minor for sorrow and grief, and E flat major in the wooden shoe dance, warmth or languor. So I believe the keys are extremely important to him. Again, rhetorical pauses. Lang and West speak about this. Extremely important in cinema. A dead silence meant something was about to happen. And I love this. Check this out. Swinnen using the dead silence, if you will. Okay, not only does he have a rest there, but he has a rest with a fermata. Okay, silence, something's gonna happen. And again, there's your double bar line. Double dotted notes. Probably a Marshall fanfare, right? Okay, going along. Dead silence. Not only does he have a half rest, eighth rest, with a fermata on top. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means stop and hold. So, wow, look at that. And then he changes key. So how fascinating that is to me, for sure. Here's more. Here's more rhetorical use of rhetorical silence. Here, look at this, triple forte. Triple forte. Dead silence. Okay, love it. Love it. Okay, now we're wrapping it up here. And if you have a chance, please read the audience reception. Keep in mind, 1927, silent film era didn't end until 1929. So this is the height of the silent movie era. And people who would come and listen to Swinnen perform, he gave many recitals throughout the United States when he got here, when he was already working for Mr. DuPont. He was done with the silent movie era. He wasn't playing in silent movies. He was dedicated to Mr. DuPont and would continue playing recitals on a regular basis and would travel throughout the country as well. But the audience reception is critical to putting my theory into improving my theory, really. Just let me read one of them with you now, and then you read another. Let's read the second one. As pleasing to the American audience were those pictorial numbers that displayed Mr. Swinnen's and the new organ's showy gifts. In the last number, the storm, the lights of the church were turned out, and the foundations rocked under the thunderous attack of the 4-manual instrument. A melodious deafening that was contrasted with the early part of the composition when the cuckoos cuckooed and the peasants danced in the fields. Okay, so those people had no image running in front of them, but they could hear that in the music. I love this, look. They were almost impelled to reach for their umbrellas. How cool is that? All right, so my suggestion to you, my friends, is this presentation was done about a year ago, and I'm doing it again for you today. And at the time, we sat and we watched a performance of that I was playing on the Aeolian at Longwood Gardens. Now I'm going to send you the links for this, so you be sure to check it out if you're interested. And then we ended up getting movie-themed wine, and I even had a Duvel beer, which is Belgian beer. And we had popcorn and we had wine and beer, so it was really fun. So if you get a chance, grab yourself a Duvel or some wine and some popcorn while you listen to the Longwood sketches. I would like to mention one more thing about Mr. Swinnen. Oh, just let me show you quickly. How stunning is this instrument, all restored all restored, and there's an extremely famous competition at Longwood Gardens, the Longwood competition. Some extremely amazing organists have won that competition, and that's the organ I got to perform my recital on, my doctoral recital. It's absolutely remarkable. And this is some innards. Okay, so there's some pipe works from that instrument. Go to Longwood Gardens. You will not be disappointed in the gardens or the organ. So I want to mention one more thing, kind of a little funny thing about Mr. Swinnen. Charles Corboyne, who was the organist at St. Patrick's, also Belgian, was a dear friend of Firmin Swinnen and his wife Augusta. The two couples got together frequently because it wasn't too far from Philadelphia up to New York. And the story goes that at their death, they both wanted to be buried next to each other in Wilmington, Delaware. And between the two graves is a case of Belgian beer. So anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. And again, I will put some links up. I have some other interesting Firmin Swinnen links I'll be sure to share with you. And I hope that I've proven to you that Longwood Sketches is a replica of a scenic film score. Thanks for coming.